Hi everybody, and welcome to a beautiful mid-March day here in Colorado. Spring is in the air. Spring's not here yet. There's still some snow on the ground, but we're not far from being able to take our camper out of storage and put it on the back of the truck and start a season of adventure. I put the camper into storage the beginning of last September, so it's been several months ago now, and it's endured the Colorado winters. I put it into storage such that I wouldn't have to worry about it over the winter. Both Stephanie and I work in Antarctica over the northern winter or the southern hemisphere summer down there, and we wouldn't be able to respond if there were any issues. So I wanted to make sure things were steady, the camper was protected, so when we came back here this spring, we could uncover it, load it up, and be ready to go. So today I want to talk about a couple of things before we de-winterize it. The first thing is how we blocked it up and stored it here in not an ideal situation with the slope to this ground, some gravel, potential runoff. And secondly, I want to talk about this cover and how well it went on, how it fit, and how it held up over the winter. So this cover is from a company called Calmark. We bought this camper used, and the previous owner had bought the cover when the camper was nearly new. According to that owner, the cover cost around $800. So I looked up Calmark online, and they look like they're a quality company. And I just want to give you my impressions of how this thing is put together, how it fit, and how it wore over the winter season here in Colorado. So if you order this camper, they request some dimensional information so they can make it to fit your rig. And this cover fit fairly well. I really am not complaining. It's probably 90% there. I mean, there are some difference in configurations with campers, even if you do take the measurements with solar panels. I have a roof rack here, and I'm not sure that all those things are taken into account. So again, it's probably 90% there in the way of a fit. So I'll just talk a little bit about how this particular one goes into place. It is fit around the front. There is an elastic cord that goes around underneath the cab over section. Here's the elastic cord where it comes out. There's toggles on each side. The cover wraps around the front, what would be in the front of the bed, and it has some buckles that attach it together. There's a total of 4 of them here. Walking around the side, you can see that there are actually 2 sets of straps that come from the top, and they're sewn into the top corners and wrap down to go underneath the camper. The rear one is pretty straightforward. It comes down and goes underneath the camper in front of the portion that hangs off the back of the truck. The front one was a little less straightforward because it fell right about where the roof rack sticks up, and it comes down, and really you could take it one of 2 ways. You could take it under the camper here near the jacks, or as I did, underneath the cab over. And I'll talk about why I made that decision after I get done walking around here a little bit. The rear fits quite well. The Northern Light camper, and I should mention that this is a Northern Light 811 camper. It is a 2016 model, and it has a special type, or an unusual type of bumper, not typical from a lot of campers, that sticks off the back. It's an aluminum platform with some fold-up steps. And you can tell that this cover was made with that in mind. It custom wraps around that bumper. It fits quite well and fits snugly in the back there. Now, the door is in the back of this camper, as typical for a slide-in. And if you feel like you need to get in and out of this camper with the cover on, I would recommend ordering a rear zipper opening. It seems to be an option that they offer on their website. You can get in and out of this, but you have to undo the lower corners down here and lift the cover up a couple of feet, and then you can climb in underneath, step up on top of the bumper, and get to the inside door. It's pretty awkward. It does put some stress and strain on the cover when I do that. So something to think about. It might be worth that extra few dollars to go ahead and get that door installed. You might notice as I'm walking around here, there are a couple of holes in this cover here on the rear, a total of 3. 1 at each rear corner. That's right where the rear jacks are, the jack motor is. and then there's one up here in the middle. I'll come around and talk about that shortly here, and when I talk about some of the pros and cons to this cover. All right, so I want to talk about securing this cover down. The fit is really pretty good. There's some things that were a bit challenging, and I'll start off with this wraparound here on the front. Where the wraparound starts is where the elastic ends, and trying to figure out just where that corner should be as it wraps around is a bit challenging. This elastic wants to pull the cover forward here at the corners, but if doing so, it means you can't really wrap these tight. So you can see that at the bottom it's pretty tight around the legs, but as you go up, it comes out away from the body and creates some looseness here that can flap around. That's one of the reasons that I wrapped this strap underneath the cab over. I think there's certainly enough material you could wrap it down under the leg if you wanted. But in doing so, this helped pull this cover back into place under the cab over here. The other issue I had that maybe goes hand in hand with trying to figure out where these corners should fall is the straps across the front. They're nicely made. If you look at the details of the sewing up here, things are folded over. You've got multiple stitching in different directions where the strap attaches here. So this is double stitched down here as well. But what is kind of odd to me is that this buckle has a pretty long strap, and with all of that strapping material, if I tighten the adjustable side up completely, it's still pretty slack, and so you can't really get a good tight finish around here. And I really think having a fairly snug finish is important just to reduce abrasion when the wind is blowing and flapping and wear and tear. Again, having said that, I really didn't have any issues with wear and tear up here. So while it's a little bit awkward to install, maybe that's quite all right. They give you a whole lot of cord with this elastic here. I've tied it up in here. Again, I have a lot of excess webbing here because of the way I wrapped it under the cab over. So I just sort of tied those up, tied them together to prevent any material from flapping around in heavy winds. And here in Colorado, you can get a lot of wind and you can get a lot of snow. So coming around to the side, it does fit the cab over fairly snugly, and the way it's cut does fit the front of the camper here pretty well, the way the angle is on the nose of this up here. The way I have this installed, you only have one strap that comes over the side here, and that actually does a pretty good job of, I think, holding the center down. So there are several grommet holes along the bottom, and I've used those with some bungee cords to connect from one side of the other to the camper. Again, to pull this in, provide some more protection, and keep the edge from flapping around in the wintertime. These back in the corner, I've actually taken and run them from this grommet over to the back corner of the structure. It just did a better job of tying this in and taking up some of that slack. So talking about these holes on the back here, this is really the only wear and tear problem I've had on the camper. Two of these are just wear and tear issues. One of these, the one up here in the middle, well, that one's my fault. So on the corners here, these are the corner jacks. They're left and right rear corner jacks for the camper. It is pretty snug here the way I have this tied up, and it obviously wore on these brackets and wore through the fabric here. This fabric is not super heavy. I think it's kind of a compromise between stiffness and the pliability, but still trying to keep some durability. There's really not any extra wear pads, nothing doubled up here, and it appears to me like what you're going to have to do if you're concerned about that is locate these areas that might be of concern, either pad them underneath or put on your own reinforcement. I mentioned that I had a roof rack on here, and so one thing I did do was I put tennis balls on the top of the roof rack posts. So I just bought a couple of packets of tennis balls, slit them and slipped them down over the top of the post and made sure that they stayed in place when the cover was put on. And I don't see any issues with wear and tear up there, so that seems to have worked out pretty well. And I think that if you have something like this down here, you probably would want to do something similar with some kind of padding. Again, here's the left side, same thing with the jack. You can see the corner of the jack underneath there. It's not sharp or jagged, but it definitely has gotten some wear. Maybe it has somewhat to do with the wind direction pushing on this back side. So this hole up here, this is my fault. There is a rear view camera mounted up there. It's on the steps of the ladder, and I had put it in place temporarily thinking I'd figure out what the best location would be and how I'd want to mount it. Never got around to doing that. There is a hose clamp in here. You can probably see it through there a little bit. That's what's holding the camera on the step, and it was poking out. It was my fault. It wasn't pushing against it real hard, but it has a sharp, jagged edge, so that definitely caught there and tore that. I've pushed it back out of the way, but I'm going to have to sew that up and make sure in the future that that's not an issue. You can get an idea of the challenge here in looking at the jacks. So if I start off here, this right rear jack is fully retracted, so it's as low as it can go. If you look at the front jacks, you can see both the left and especially the right are fairly extended. So there's probably close to 18-inch difference between the right rear and the left front jack. So it's actually sloped in two different directions. And I was able to back the truck in here and get the jacks extended enough to lift it off the bed, pull the truck out from underneath, and then I had to level it and then start to lower it. So it's basically sitting level right now. It's probably about an inch lower in the back than the front, which gives a little bit of a back tilt, which is what's recommended by the manufacturer for storage. So the other challenge here is this is a dirt and gravel storage lot, and there's basically chipped up, recycled or repurposed asphalt here that's spread around. And so it's not muddy, which is nice, but it is, with the slope, subject to some erosion. You might be able to see here, you can see where some water has flowed down, a little bit of channeling here. And I was a bit concerned that some of that would happen around the supports and potentially create a problem, especially if I just used the 4 corner supports from the jacks. I was also a little concerned about settling. This gravel is pretty good, but combines settling with erosion, and there's a possibility that one of these jacks could become undermined and cause an uneven load. Maybe that would cause more settling and problems. And I just did not want to have to worry about that. So under each of the 4 corners, I put 4 jack pads. They can also work as small leveling blocks, but I put those under the jacks to help give them a little more surface area to spread out on. I also purchased a pair of these larger jack stand pads here, and I plan on using those in the future and taking them with me to help supplement these smaller ones if I get into a particularly soft area I need to jack the camper up on. But in the meantime, I use those to help support the load of these supplemental jacks that I put underneath the camper. So these supplemental jacks are a set of 4 aluminum frame jacks. They're not particularly tall, but they're lightweight, fairly small. They can nest some for storage when I'm not using them. And in the back, they're directly underneath the camper with some wood, scrap wood that I had supporting them. In the front, I have them sitting on a couple of cinder blocks. That was kind of the easiest thing to grab that I knew would hold up for the winter and wasn't that expensive. Again, I have some scrap wood on top of those, and then the jacks on top of that. I can see where there's been some channeling, a little bit of erosion, also some material that's piled up on top of the pads that I have here. So there's definitely been some soil and gravel movement here. So I'm really glad I did it this way. From underneath, you can see what I did was I bought an 8-foot treated 4x4, readily available at the hardware store. I cut it in half and then used that to spread the load out front and back between the supplemental jacks. I took a large wood bit and drilled in a hole underneath here just to recess for these jacks to go up in, so I wouldn't have to worry about slippage at all. The manufacturer recommends putting a 3/4 inch piece of plywood underneath this to support it front and back if you're going to use additional supports like this. I suppose that wouldn't hurt. I think that's probably of marginal use. You don't have to get very far away from these wooden supports that I have under here for that 3/4 inch plywood to not really be doing any good. Take a look at what your manufacturer says, take that into consideration, and decide what you're going to do. As far as placement goes, you can see I took the 4x4 directly under the leading edge of the camper. So I picked that location because there is some framing behind there, and that'll put the load path directly underneath that vertical wall, as opposed to if I put this further back, it would put a little bit of bending moment underneath that and could distort the fiberglass. In the back, it's not all the way in the rear, but it's right about where the rear of the truck bed falls. And so it's a similar situation there where I'm trying to put the load path underneath where it's designed to carry it. Again, check your camper. Yours might be designed a little bit differently. So here I've lifted the cover up, and I'll show you a couple things here. I did use some bungees up front here and ran those through the jacks just to help keep the cover from moving around, but to give you a better idea of what this 4x4 looks like with the jack. I don't want the main load to be taken by these jack stands. They are supplemental in case there's a problem, and maybe spread out the load a little bit and stabilize the camper. So what I did here was I put the jacks down, leveled it, made sure they were evenly loaded, and then I came in and installed these underneath and then used the handle to jack them up and apply pressure to the wood that way. What I don't want to do is put these in place and then, raise the jack legs here and have most of the load taken up by these supports. The idea here is these are just supplemental in case there's a problem and to help with stability. Hey, so thanks for checking out the video here. I hope it gives you some ideas of how you might be able to store your camper in the wintertime. Gives you some impressions of how this cover works. All in all, I'm pretty happy with the cover. I'm happy it came with the camper. It was great to have it this winter. It really did a good job of protecting it. You do obviously have to be careful of wear points or some sharp edges. That probably goes without saying for any cover, but keep a special lookout for some of those things that might impact your camper. So now I've got to come out here to do some real work as well. I'm getting ready to make some measurements up here for some new solar panels. Watch for that video coming in the future. And we're going to get this thing ready, get on the road, and have some amazing adventures this spring here in Colorado and beyond. If you found this information helpful, I'd really appreciate a subscribe, maybe a like, help other folks be able to see this video. Also give you a chance to see some of the adventures and upgrades we've got planned in the very near future. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video. We really appreciate it, and I hope to see you out there soon.